Good morning. It is Tuesday, August 20th, and I am Chris Wilterding from Young People's Ministries. I'm sitting here in my office in Nashville, Tennessee at the General Board of Discipleship. And if you're watching us live, today we are talking about social justice issues and conversations with young people in the wake of recent decisions around George Zimmerman, Trayvon Martin, and other cases where social justice issues have come to the forefront. Before we jump into things, I would like to pass it around and do introductions. And on my screen, I'm going to go from my left to my right. So I think I'm heading to Austin, Texas first. To Abigail Parker, who may or may not want to introduce herself, especially when she's not muted. Oh no, Abby.
Hey, I'm here for reals.
There you go.
Yay. So the reason my mic was muted was that I'll pop up on the screen if it's not muted. Sorry about that. Hi, I'm Abigail Parker. I'm in Austin, Texas as regional staff. I'm recently engaged, which is awesome. Sorry, I'm just saying that to everyone, everywhere. Anyhow, it's good to see everyone. I've been on vacation for the last couple of weeks. Well, actually for 1 week. The week before, I was hanging out with youth from Marcha, a Hispanic caucus that meets within the Methodist Church, and that was tons of fun. We were talking about the Holy Spirit, and I left feeling empowered, blessed, renewed, excited, and really good way to start vacation, actually, with the Holy Spirit involved. And then I went to Wild Goose Festival, which was also tons of fun, a good way to learn about what's happening in the church beyond the United Methodist world in which I live. And I'm looking forward to figuring out what to do with both of those workshops I attended as time goes on, especially here in my region, where we deal a ton with issues of immigration and people who need more Hispanic ministry resources and how to help our church move forward. Anyhow, that's a little bit about me. Talk to me if you have ideas.
Awesome. Thanks, Abby. Let's head up to Detroit, Michigan.
Hi, I'm Carl Thomas Gladstone. I serve as the regional staff person for North Central Jurisdiction. I hope I'm not muted.
We can hear you.
Muted.
Oh, that's great. As you see behind me, I work on some projects, including Youth Missions, which is a database of United Methodist connected mission destinations for young people, and the RevGo.org project, which is kind of a database of places where young adults can serve and can crowdfund those missional engagements. Really excited to have a conversation today as a young person in the last century. I served on the G Corps for a little while, so it's glad to see that their work is still continuing and helping us discern some of this stuff about justice and faith communities and young people. So thanks.
We're so old. Did you own records?
Wax records, wax cylinders.
Wow.
All right, thank you, Carl. Let us head east towards New Jersey.
Hello, I'm Hannah Bonner, and I am, yes, in Jersey, but still a proud member of the Eastern Pennsylvania Conference, don't forget it. I serve the Northeastern Jurisdiction, and I'm just coming off of a big weekend with the Oasis event where we had 150 young adult leaders from around the Northeast headed towards DC this past week for our gathering for conversation, and we are so grateful to the folks from G Corps who actually facilitated and guided us towards productive and peaceful conversation, and so we're grateful to you guys. And yeah, continuing to look forward to all that lies ahead here in the Northeast and the results that will come out of that building energy around young adults as well as youth.
All right, Hannah, thanks a ton. And we will actually stay sort of up there in the Northeast and head over to Washington, D.C.
Yeah. Hey guys, my name is Jeehye. I work at the General Commission on Religion and Race. I'm the social media specialist and production support here, which means I do a lot of random things, and every day is different. I had no idea about this Hangout until like 30 minutes ago, and Jeehye was like, "Can you please step in for me and just have a conversation with them?" And because he had something else to do last minute. So I'm really glad to be here, and I actually met Hannah this past weekend at the Oasis, which was really great to just be in a space with over 100 young adult United Methodists who are really passionate, who are really open about justice and open about what it means to cross boundaries and what it means to really be a church. And I know that we started that conversation this past weekend, and I can see that with you guys are always having conversations, maybe not always having an answer, but that's part of the journey. And so so great to be here and see what questions you guys have and what we can do and further our dialogue together.
Well, Jeehye, thank you so much for being with us today. Would you be able to kind of share a little bit about who the General Commission on Religion and Race is as an agency?
Yes. So General Commission on Religion and Race, Jeehye just walked by and I was like, where it goes?
Oh, see, he's the guy that's making you do all his work.
I know. Is an agency of the United Methodist Church where we are tasked with just keeping the church in check, that we are having equity in the church. And it's not, I know that our name has the word race in it, so a lot of people think, oh, they must do everything just around race and ethnicity, but it's really a lot more than that. Just making sure that the churches are representative of our own communities, that it reflects the ethnicities in our communities, the class, the education level, you know, all kinds of diverse people that live in our community, in the world, and we're hoping to bring that into the church. And so we are more than about race issues. And so we are actually, so GCOR is actually starting a lot of new things this fall, especially a new website and a lot of new resources. So until then, you know, we're kind of like on this journey of really getting those out. But it's really about creating that equitable church where it represents the community and the world that we live in.
Great, and we will make sure to have the GCOR's website in our show notes under our YouTube link once this thing is up and at 'em. The conversations around equity and justice, I think, are interesting ones, because I think that those are words that youth, young adults, college students might hear as buzzwords, but may not necessarily understand what they mean, particularly in our Christian context. So I would be interested in perhaps starting there. You know, how do we, and Hannah, Carl, Abby, Jeehye, everybody can jump in on this one, how do we define equity and justice as United Methodists trying to live out our faith?
Well, I'd be really interested in Jeehye sharing a little bit, because during my time on the General Commission on Religion and Race, there was I think they were operating in a bit of a traditional model of communicating what that justice and looks like in the world. And Jeehye, as the social media coordinator now for GCOR, you must be on this really new kind of front line of communication and sharing. Typically, what I saw happening in previous generations, and not just with GCOR, but was that there were big systemic issues that the church would respond to in big systemic ways. So we would get together and we would, pass legislation at General Conference, and then the General Commission on Religion and Race might be the arm that writes the letter and does the advocacy around that issue. Today, working with young people, it seems like justice happens at the grassroots, right? Mm-hmm. Injustice and justice happen at the grassroots. And it's been really interesting to see churches and parts of the United Methodist Church reorient itself around how do we enable people at the grassroots level to speak justice, to speak, justice to power on a personal one-to-one neighborhood kind of level, rather than waiting for us to have to write the official letter, Mm-hmm. Jeehye, I wonder if you've seen some of that work at work as well?
Yeah, I mean, I've actually only been at GCOR since the beginning of this year, so since January. But speaking from experience, I would say that, you know, justice work and justice conversation does start at the grassroots. And as a young adult myself, you know, like I do care, I guess, what happens at General Conference, but like what really matters is what happens every day, what I see in the church, what I see in my communities. And it's been great to meet a lot of young adults and youth nowadays who are really, you know, who see the effects of injustice in their own lives and the lives of their families and friends, and really say that, you know, that's something that we need to talk about in the church. So when you say grassroots, you know, I do see it on social media and you know, in our conversations as this, but I really see grassroots as like in the local church. What are the youth and the young adults talking about in the local church? What is the pastor saying in the pulpit about these justice issues? And I actually come from the Korean American church, and so I work at a Korean American church right now, and there is no talk about justice at all in the pulpit. And that's been my experience growing up in the Korean American church. And so to see, you know, that young adults talk about this not only on social media, but also that it's preached in the church, that it's, you know, a campaign, that it's something that's part of a DNA of who we are as Christians, as United Methodists, it's really great. And so as the social media specialist at GCOR, that is part of what we do here, is to engage in conversations with young folks through Twitter, through Facebook, through the blogs, through our website, because it's not really about, sure, it would be great if we could, I guess the ultimate goal is to pass legislation and have all these understanding, but it's really the interactions that we have each day and the conversations that we have and the understandings and the sharing of life that we do, like you said, in the grassroots level is very important.
I imagine a rotating list of the top 10 hashtags that GCOR has decided would be really great for the church to move on, you know?
Yeah.
And on your website, you could just have them listed out, and then you could measure which ones are getting the most traction, which ones are really passionate among United Methodists in Africa or United Methodists in the Western jurisdiction or something. You could do something like that.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I'm going to jot that down and share that with my communications director, and we'll put that on the new website. Yeah, thank you.
I think the ability to connect via social media is huge in the wake of you know, recent events and conversations. The idea for this hangout came about because of the George Zimmerman, Trayvon Martin trial and decision. That by now was a couple of months ago, but I think we're still feeling the effects of, because there was something about the way that trial happened, the way that the verdict came out, that really inspired a lot of people to get out and start showing their actions and showing their passion. I think, Carl, that's a great word for it. Their passionate response to this decision, because there was something that did not feel just or did not feel equitable about that decision and how it was announced, and it really incited some conversation. Some of it was helpful, and a lot of the actions also were very damaging, as we saw riots and things come out about it. I'd be interested to hear how those passions ended up being lived out and how we can make them relate to making a difference in terms of justice from within our context. I know that's kind of a large question. But my own experience with it, we are semi-recently relocated to the Nashville area, and I went to church the Sunday after the decision came down for the George Martin and Trayvon Martin case, George Zimmerman, Trayvon Martin case, fully expecting and hoping to hear my pastor from the pulpit be able to say something about who we are as a people of faith and what our response can look like in the wake of something that could divide as opposed to unite. And it was like children's musical Sunday, where the whole I walked into the sanctuary and the whole thing was set up with like a little stage for Mount Zion in the background, and there wasn't word one about it, and I left kind of feeling disappointed that I didn't have some input from my pastor on that level. So I'm actually really looking forward to the conversation too, because not only myself, but I think other young people are looking for constructive ways to put that passion into action in ways that unite and not divide. Oh, Abby, mute, unmute.
Thank you. Sorry, I was saying I definitely think that young people are looking for ways to unite around issues, and they're looking for leaders to step up. I think that's one of both the advantages and disadvantages of our social media culture, right? Like, you can say all sorts of stuff, and people can get really, riled up on their Facebook page, but it doesn't always translate to direct action and direct service. A lot of times what I find is that people get really excited and passionate, but there's no sort of avenue for response. And I think we do, as a church, need to remember to step into those places and say things like, hey, at Servant Church, we try really hard to develop cross-racial and cross-economic relationships. And that's one of our primary goals when we are doing mission and service, is not to just be doing some sort of charitable work, but also develop real relationships with people who are different from us. And so, if your church is already doing things like that, that's a great time to step into a conversation and say, hey, if this is something you really care about, come to our picnic this Sunday, where we'll be having some discussion around this with people who are cross racial and economic boundaries. So I think in some ways we need to be a step ahead, I guess, or able to say, here are some direct actions you can take. Another thing that we do as a church is the practice of lament, which, after the trial happened, and the verdict came down, I'm really grateful to be part of a church that, lamented our brokenness. We did have other plans for that Sunday that we still did, but we also included a time of lament and talked more extensively about it the next Sunday. And so I really think young people, probably especially in the U.S., would like us to embrace those psalms, those lamentations, the ability to grieve in our churches about our broken world and celebrate the fact that we're a resurrection people working toward a kingdom of God. We really have a good, hopeful narrative that I don't think we employ enough on Facebook and in real life.
Chris, the flip side of your story, I just heard this past weekend we had a group come in to do some volunteering in Detroit, and they were talking about showing up on the Sunday after the George Zimmerman verdict, and all of a sudden their pastor went all political on them. Right? And the words that they were using as they were describing this was, it's not that we don't care about the people. It's not that we don't care about the family of Trayvon Martin or the family of George Zimmerman or whatever. It's just that we don't think the pulpit should be a place of politics. Mm-hmm. And I wonder if there's a way, using different communication styles, that you could avoid that sense of this one person is giving their opinion, and all of a sudden it's communicated, and the congregation receives it as this diatribe, And if we could bring more voices into that conversation, maybe people don't feel as kind of bullied in one direction or another. Maybe more people have an opportunity to say, yeah, what would it be like if we didn't just have the soundbite conversation, but what if we said, well, what does the Bible tell us about our enemies, and people that we think might be our enemies, right? And that, I do believe that would be the more important conversation to have as Christian community. Anyway, I thought that was interesting that they had exactly the flip side reaction as you did about addressing this kind of justice issue. I think, though, that it's about how we address it more than anything.
I'm wondering if we can use the language of politics like kind of like a cop-out, because there is a significant overlap between the things that we deal with in the political realm and the things that we deal with in the sense of a social holiness, justice, and reconciliation realm. And I think that sometimes we can, because there's that overlap, we can label something political and thus not open to conversation or dialogue or open to being aired, because we're supposed to avoid politics. And it's like, really, it's just one of those, what is it, Venn diagrams, where there's an overlap, and it's like, yes, this is political, but it is also spiritual. And it also needs to be something that we deal with openly and honestly and take action on. And I think sometimes with the things that make us uncomfortable, we can just cope by escaping responsibility to act by labeling it political, and thus something the church has no responsibility in.
And that, I think, we talk about dialogue and conversation a lot, and I think that's really what it is, that whenever something like this happens, we need to have that space for church folks, for young adults, for youth to just ask those questions of, what does this mean as Christians? Like, why did this happen? This is how I feel. Is it too political? Is it something that we should talk about? What does Jesus say? And so just to have those moments of open conversation and dialogue, I think is very important, because, I mean, I imagine a lot of churches didn't mention anything on that Sunday about the case. And imagine a lot of church people and young people being left feeling, oh, maybe this should have been addressed, maybe it doesn't pertain to us as Christians. And so I think to really just have that space of, let's talk about this. Let's talk about what's going on in the world, because we are a church of the world. And just to remind pastors to give that time and space for that. I think that's really important for our youth and young adults.
Were there any particular messages that you were being asked to share in the wake of that decision, Jeehye?
Well, they were asking us for our for what our stance is, and just come up with, to share what our what we think of the case. But we honestly didn't want to really be this voice of G-Corps has all the answers, and this is what the church should think about, or this is what the church says. So we kind of stepped away from that, and also our General Secretary, Erin Hawkins, is on sabbatical, and a lot happened while she was gone. And so we're scrambling to do something about it, and I wish we did more. We really didn't. I wish we did more. And so I think conversations like this is really helpful, so that we know what kind of questions are being asked. And I think maybe what we can provide is that space of young adults and youth to just say, hey, this is what we talked about in church, or this is what was not talked about in church. What do you think? What do I think? And kind of creating that hub of space for them to really ask those questions and have those dialogue.
I wonder too if some sort of vocabulary lists, or like the conversation around politically charged terms kind of struck a chord with me, because I think you're right, Hannah. There's a tremendous overlap in terms of equity and justice issues with how we understand political issues, but helping people discover the language that maybe isn't any less inflammatory, because I think if we're called to social holiness, there will be challenging language in that conversation, but
Right.
It would be different than the kind of terms that are so politically charged that it shuts down any sort of conversation around equity and justice. And I don't know if I would be the person to try to put those together or not, but
Well, I think it's a two-way street. It's about learning to use language that that can be heard and isn't going to be perceived as accusatory, but there's also a calling and a responsibility for all of us to nurture the ability to listen to that without being defensive and without to be able to hear, and particularly those of us who are accustomed to the world patting us on the back, to be accustomed to hear something that makes us uncomfortable and that might feel like it indicates that we have a responsibility and to make things different, that we have a responsibility to act with justice that we perhaps don't want to deal with. So I think it's learning to speak the right way, but also like helping people to learn to be willing to hear and to listen, and not just to react and to push away anything that feels uncomfortable, but that the church and justice and all of this is uncomfortable sometimes.
Yeah, it would be different if we had a general commission on race, but we have a general commission on religion and race, which I hope is, and I think is, doing Jesus politics in a world that's used to its own politics. And I think that's really good.
Preach.
I think that we do need to keep talking politics in light of how Jesus calls us to talk about them. Yeah.
Right, and Jesus was very, so this is my personal understanding, Jesus was very political, during his time. That is the gospel, that is the ministry of making sure that there is equity and justice in the world and in our communities. And unfortunately, well, a lot of it does overlap with politics, and like we talked about, some churches don't feel comfortable about doing that, but I think through dialogue and conversation we can have those conversations and say, how does this impact our communities? How does this impact our friends and our church members and our churches? And what does God call us to do as a church, as Christians?
I think as a way to perhaps wrap up our conversation together, I would be interested to hear thoughts on, to bring it back to the beginning, the grassroots idea of how things sort of bubble up in terms of the way that equity and justice are talked about. I think the George Zimmerman trial and verdict were obviously a large-scale national one that inspired a lot of movements across the country. But in some ways, justice issues don't have to be that big to deserve our attention. I remember one of the pieces that popped up when I was at St. Luke's out in Highlands Ranch, Colorado, had to do with folks who were on the janitorial staff at one of the local shopping malls and them not being allowed to carry water bottles as part of their little kits that they would wheel around as they were cleaning the mall. And they also weren't allowed breaks. And so how was somebody going to be able to stay hydrated in the course of doing their job? And a couple of my kids, saw that as an issue and started to have conversation around it. So what are some ways that we can inspire or encourage folks to participate in those difficult conversations to allow things to bubble up from the grassroots level? Is there an attitude? Is there a program? Really, where can campus ministers, where can youth leaders encourage those conversations to happen?
Well, one model that comes to my mind, John Lewis was just recently on the Colbert Report. I don't know if anybody saw that, but he's
what's that show? I've never heard of it.
He's a congressman that I have a lot of respect for, and he was the president of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee during the Civil Rights Movement. His book is really great, and it talks about this his perception from that role of Martin Luther King Jr. And there was some perception that things didn't really ever get going in a city or on a particular march until Martin Luther King showed up, right? That there was some sense that we had to wait for this central figure before things are really energized. And part of the witness of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee was these young people getting together. They would go off to camps to train each other and get trained by these historic nonviolent people, in tactics on how to cause trouble, but in a nonviolent way. And their whole thing was, wherever there are young people, we can go cause trouble and in a good way towards civil rights. And I just think that's really great, and we should probably take heed there a little bit. Like, how can we be creating, because I think that the centralized, powerful figurehead leaders will emerge naturally, right? There will be prominent preachers on given topics, and they already have a base for making their witness toward justice known. But what are those ways that we're giving everyday people, everyday young people, the capacity to go out there and be the day-to-day movement? I think that's really enticing to me.
Mm.
Yeah, I do think I think I've probably said this, but there is sort of this just let things happen from the grassroots. I think sometimes people can fall into that category, or the church completely abdicates and says, we aren't going to speak into this at all. And I think finding some middle ground of how do you empower those people who are obviously passionate by giving them training, by giving them resources. We have a movement happening here in Austin right now for affordable homes. It's called Keep Austin Affordable. And it's working just like any political campaign does work now, via grassroots motivation. And that doesn't mean they simply just, let people figure it out. It means that there are some leaders pulling together other people who are passionate, giving them training, sending those people out to pull other people together, to give those people training, to send them out, so that those movements really multiply. But those movements also have a voice and a message and similar ideas, similar conversations, and then some activities those groups do together. And so I think as a church we want to have more conversation around race, and if we do think that's an important issue, which I think many of us do, we need to be providing some leadership and resources on how to have those conversations, and not trying to get everyone to do it either. I don't think it's a matter of like, okay, church, we're going to talk about this for 6 weeks, and everyone needs to show up. I think it's finding who's passionate about it and giving those people resources and leadership so that they can start sharing and proclaiming a message of equity and justice. It takes people years to have different ideas about issues. I think sometimes we want to just speak it from the pulpit and it's done, but change happens over the course of years. And I know I feel differently about issues that I didn't 10 years ago, and it's because people actively had conversations with me about those issues for a long, long time. So not everyone's on the same page, and that's okay, but find the people who are and start there.
Chris, I think this is an awesome question, not just for young adults and church leaders to think about on how to have those conversations, how to keep it relevant, how to engage our young adults and youth in justice ministries and issues, but it's, as speaking on behalf of G-Corps, this is exactly the question that we ask ourselves too. It's like, what does our church need from us? What does young adults and youth need from the agencies, from the churches? And so I hope that us talking here, and also the listeners, the viewers, if there are anything specific that comes to your mind that you feel like, oh, this is a kind of resource that I wish I had when this happened, or I hope that we can have this type of resource in the future, just to send us an email. And because we aren't an agency, or we're not church people that has all the answers, and it's really learning from each other. And I think that goes with the dialogue and the conversations we talk about when it comes to justice issues, is that we really do learn from each other. And so, I don't know what the answer is either. I know that a lot of churches, and I think youth leaders and young adult church leaders and pastors, may not have the resources that they need, or they may not even have the conversations that we're having that they need to have to understand, what it means to really to be the young people that really care about justice issues. Yeah, so keep us in mind and share with us as you go on your journey. Be part of our journey too.
I think that's a great way to be able to sum it up. To walk along one another and have these conversations in some ways, is the answer. That constructive conversation really is the lifeblood of discipleship and the change that we can inspire in the world. I really think this was a great conversation today, and Jeehye, thank you for jumping in on short notice and playing nicely with others. As you can tell, I think Young People's Ministries really has a cool staff. We're very passionate about local churches being able to be who they are and live into their calling and ministry well. And we're thankful for the connections that we have with GCORE as an agency, and also thankful for the conversations that this video time will inspire for other folks around the country and hopefully around the denomination. So Jeehye, thank you again. Hannah, Carl, Abby, thank you all again. I think I'm going to try to put on a hat from Google Effects as we get out of here. This is my symbol that we're done.
Nice, nice.
And I may or may not edit out the hat at the very end, but thank you again all for your time.